Another habit of a systems thinker is to consider an issue fully and resist the urge to come to a hasty conclusion. Because we are often faced with decisions which oftentimes deserve careful consideration, right? Now, there's no straight away jumping to a conclusion, right? We should not be doing that, uh, jumping to a conclusion without fully understanding. We need to weigh the options, the potential outcomes of our decisions before finalizing what would be our decision, right? So, this is very important. This will help us avoid hasty decisions and poor implementations and outcomes of those decisions. I still remember one incident, just to give you an idea of what I'm talking about as far as this habit is concerned. A student came to me to migrate from one professor to another professor as supervisor. So he told me the story of why he wanted a change of advisor, what influenced this change. And after listening to his story, I was sort of influenced by his story and felt that I should change the advisor. But suddenly it's dawned on me, no, I have not fully considered the issue. I should talk to the advisor and find out what his point of view was. And therefore, I checked with the advisor. I had a long conversation with that advisor, learnt about the circumstances under which the two didn't get along. I took my time and thought about what to do. Instead of taking a hasty decision, I thought about what to do. And that time that I took gave me a direction that seemed worthwhile. Later, I contacted the advisor as well as the student, conducted a meeting together, and the meeting was to present what the student had done so far, and the supervisor got to hear whatever the student has done and whether he was doing in the right direction, etc., etc. It provided for an audience from the supervisor and an opportunity for the student to tell what he has done so far, what work he has done. Mind you, this greatly resolved the problem because there was very little communication between the student and the supervisor, and therefore the supervisor assumed that the student did not work so much, right? And therefore it was easy for me to resolve the problem. Had I not considered the issue completely and looked at only from one party side, only from the student's story side, I would have probably taken a decision which was contrary to the decision that I have made right now, which I thought is a wise decision. Because there was little communication, and therefore, when the communication happened, it was possible for me to resolve in a way that provided for a better outcome. When you need to have a quick fix because time constraint, there may not be enough time. But those are small portion of such things that happen, such incidences that happen. Mostly one may have time to consider, and therefore carefully considering, taking time for the solution to arrive at decisions that will lead to desired outcomes is important. That will give sort of a balance between quick fixes and carefully considered decisions. It's also important, once you have made a decision, to communicate that decision with clarity to the other person. That's very, very important. Because what happens is usually between the issue that is prevailing and the resolution that takes time, there is this time during which there is tension. And it is this tension that usually is the root cause of a hasty decision. And therefore, one has to be more careful when such a tension leads you into, pushes you into a hasty decision. Okay, that tension we cannot avoid, and it better be there as it is. And therefore, just to remind you of the habit, each issue should be considered fully and not let ourselves get into a situation of a hasty decision. This is one important systems thinkers habit that will lead to very good outcomes. Another habit of a systems thinker we will discuss now. Usually, a systems thinker uses the understanding of the system structure completely and identifies the leverage points so that possible leverage actions can be taken. Seems complicated? What does it mean? Let me give an example. So, in our seminar hall, we had an important meeting going on. There was a speaker who was using the projector system to present her findings. Suddenly, the projector switched off, but the fan and light were working. One of the colleagues who quickly understood how the power distribution works in that seminar hall, he understood that this is a three-phase connection and one of the phases seems to have gone off. So, in order to save time, he quickly plugged in the projector cable onto the socket that was on the same line as the fan and light. And we were back again in the meeting, and the speaker could proceed with less interruption now. So, he used his understanding of how the power distribution works and finds out how he could leverage based on the system structure, in this case three-phase connection, for a possible action to get things move on. Okay. Had he not known this three-phase work, how the three-phase works, we would have been waiting for a long time to get back to discussing the speaker's findings, and we would have probably lost that intensity of the discussion that we would have had. Sometimes it is also possible that when one understands the structure of a particular system, one would be able to identify and locate the points where we can draw more advantage by tapping such points. We call these as leverage points. That's what I said when I talked about the habit, leverage actions, right? And a systems thinker would be able to leverage such appropriate actions at appropriate circumstances. Mind you about this three-phase connection that I talked about, to extract the most out of the system, right? And while doing so, when he or she identifies the leverage points by carefully examining the cause and effect connections, the systems thinker is able to get the maximum out of the system and the circumstance at the moment that it is needed. Let me give an example. Long back when I was dean students, we wanted to find out ways by which we could improve all-round development of the students. Mind you, when they come to an institution like IIT, they needed to get through the competitive exams, which meant that they had to have intense preparation. They had to leave out certain things that they were doing as extracurricular activities, meeting friends, etc., etc. A lot of it they would miss just to focus on what they have to accomplish. And therefore, what happened was they would now become a sort of uh, instead of having this all-round development that happens to them, it was monotonous development that was happening. So we recognized that, and we felt we should have ways by which a student is able to improve and develop the all-round personality of theirs. For this, we needed to create an ecosystem, right? The ecosystem that provided for more opportunities for the students to try out various activities beyond the academics that they are good at. So, what we did first was to map out how the student spends the 24 hours in a day, right? We call this as time auditing of a student. We understood various responsibilities and the roles that a student plays, and how and when the time is spent on those roles and responsibilities. So, while auditing this for a typical student, typical student's day, we could figure out the time that is available for them to introduce these activities that would help them in terms of all-round personality. When we looked at it completely, the structure of such a system, right from where the hostels are located, when the mess timings were, when the classes were held, when the extracurricular activities happened, when they slept, how are the weekends spent, all those, right? This helped us identify times when the students would be free, and many times this is something that we may not know, and if we introduce certain things, certain activities at times that they are busy, the whole thing is a waste. So, we identified when the students would be available. Involving in such activities would help them develop their all-round personality, right? And more or less like what happened to them before joining an institute like this, most of them prefer a formal structure. When you have a course to do, you have a formal structure as to doing certain things, homework, attending classroom, discussing with the other students, discussing with the teacher, all these things happen, right? It's a structure. So, a student prefers something like a formal structure of an activity, just like what happens in a classroom environment for learning. This we were able to figure out. Once we did this, we now had all the understanding of the structure and how we could introduce a structured program for them to come and learn things beyond the academics. It could be fine arts, it could be various skills, literary skills, cultural skills, even personal growth lessons, right? What not. We went to the extent of how much they would be able to pay, right? Because all these are connected, and it's important to leverage, understand the system structure completely, find out these leverage points. How much can they pay? What mode of payment would be easy for them to pay, right? If it is as a circuitous payment, they may probably avoid. Okay. Remember, we had to create a system where it was possible for them, it was made easy for them to get into this kind of activities program. We called it as leisure time activities program because it's the leisure time that we identified as the time that they will be able to devote for these activities. Even today, it is surviving because we could identify these leverage points in the system structure, in the structure of the student's life at IIT. so that we could we could have the desired outcome of an all-round personality development of the student. And therefore, we basically ask several questions to understand the structure of the system, right? So that we can identify important leverage points of the system for the desired outcome. So, what are they? The first thing is what works well in the system of learning. Okay, if I am talking about learning, but what works well in the system is something to identify. What produce less desirable results, what produce desirable results. Also the big picture of the system, okay. What are the ingredients of the system? What does the system in overall sense accomplish? What small changes make the system have desired results or improve the results greatly, right? It is also important to sustain the results that a system obtains for a long period of time. So, it is also important to have big picture of the student life. In the example that I showed, what is the student life? That is a system, right? The student life consists of classroom attendance, hostel life, commuting, all those things put together is a system, right? And we have all ingredients of the system when we look at the big picture of the student life. And we also have to identify what are those small changes that, if done, that's what we talk about as leveraging actions, will improve the results that are outcomes of the system. Can we sustain this outcome to be desirable for a longer period of time? That's another question that we ask. Can we improve, can we up the performance of the system by these small changes? When we do this, eventually leveraging these points, we eventually see an outcome and are able to monitor the performance and greatly improve the performance of the system. This is one habit that a system thinker can have to achieve greater heights by spotting those leverage points of the system that he or she deals with, right? And therefore, just to summarize, a system thinker looks at the system, looks at the structure of the system, identifies those leverage points. A lever is one that increases an advantage multifold, right? In a mechanical system, it is a mechanical advantage. So, how do the system thinkers identify those points where leveraging actions will produce greater results, desired outcomes, right? Identifying, spotting those leverage points and using those leverage points in order to improve the system is one other habit that a system thinker can possess. Let's come to an important habit of a systems thinker. This is a very important habit, and practicing this habit develops a real systems thinker in you, in us. What is that? It is about making connections within the system, how the system is connected with its elements or ingredients. Understanding that and making sure that those connections exist within the elements of the system, and also connections between one system and the other. Identifying, spotting, making connections between the systems is an important skill of a systems thinker. Remember, a system is an assemblage of parts. When some of the important assemblages collapse or fail, the entire system could collapse. It could collapse into a heap, no more a system. And therefore, the importance of such delicate assemblages, such important connections. When we are able to identify such connections in a system, we allow ourselves a deeper understanding of the system as a whole and each of the parts that the system consists of, each of the parts within the system. Not only that, we also notice that different systems connect to one another in more than one way. It could be logical connections, it could be functional dependencies, it could be causal connections, right? But all those, if we are able to notice and practice this over and over to see those connections, we become better at it over and over. We are able to understand the complex cause and effect relationships, and we begin to come up with newer ideas and thoughts. What more? Right? This is a very important skill to develop. How do I develop this skill? Very simple. I just need to observe and find out the complex cause and effect relationships that exist within a system and between the systems. Remember, everything is connected, right? In this world, everything is connected. And therefore, it is important to identify important and meaningful connections that stand alone. When we identify these important and meaningful connections that stand alone, we start to preserve such connections for a long period of time, so that the system is able to function for a long period of time. The system is able to efficiently function. To give a simple example, the popular example is a plant grows from a seed and then it flowers, and then the fruits come out of the flowers, and those eventually again produce seeds. Not only that, the plant is dependent, is connected to birds, is connected to the insects, those butterflies, those honeybees that pollinate the flowers. Not only that, the plant needs sun, water, the wind, which takes the pollens to various places, right? It also helps in spreading the seed, and therefore plant needs these sun, wind and water. Sometimes even the predators and unfavorable weather that adversely affect the system is also an important component of understanding and learning. We need to be aware of that also. Supposing I am an agriculturalist, I am into agriculture, I need to understand this. What could be the predators? What could be the unfavorable adverse conditions that could exist, that could affect the plant, so that I can preserve, I can find out ways and means by which I can preserve the plant. And so, if you look at it, the survival of the plant and its species depends on this intricate series of connections within the plant, between the plants and the other systems. When I say systems, bird is a system, insect is a system, sun, air, wind, water and so on. While these are natural connections, a farmer's livelihood depends on crops and seeds, and therefore has to consider all the above factors for getting good seeds also for the next crop. So, in a way, if you look at it, There are so many entities within the system where it is possible to now connect and draw an interconnected, interrelationship map, interrelationship cause and effect map, which will be very useful for one to identify what to do and what not to do. When one connection becomes stronger, the eventual effect may become stronger. For example, if more predators, less plants. But if we have more fruits and seeds, there is possibility of planting more and more plants. Okay, now how do we develop this habit? Well, as I told you, this interrelationship cause and effect connections for a system or could be between the systems is something that I keep observing and noticing, right? So that's something that I can do. I can probably find systems, umpteen number of systems. You look around, you have umpteen number of systems. It may be a good idea to keep drawing the causal chart. So we'll keep drawing the cause and effect chart, right? As you draw this over and over, when you have all the parts of the system, understand the purpose of the parts of the system and the system, and ask questions about how these parts are connected, and I draw that cause and effect diagram or chart. It helps me in terms of understanding the system as a whole. There may be some things which are apparent ones, not immediately visible to our eyes, not meet the eyes. But as we do this over and over, it is possible for us to identify those invisible ones at the initial stage. We develop the ability to transfer that understanding of how the parts are connected. Not only that, when we do this over and over, when we have a system that we have understood and another system that we also have understood, we don't stop there. We develop an ability to transfer the understanding of one system by making connections to the other very different systems, but may probably have similar behavior, right? What does it do to us? It provides for innovation. Perhaps all those leverage points that we talked about in the other habit of leveraging some of those points of the system that may exist in another system. I hope you understand what I am saying. If I am able to identify between two similar systems leverage points for a system, then I can go to the other system and ask, oh, okay, are there similar leverage points in the other system? When we do that, it provides for fantastic innovation, right? It's possible for us to identify now those leverage points and make use of those leverage points to bear fruits of innovation and invention, and therefore for a better living. Not to talk of learning from such connections. In a way, that's what we call as growth mindset. The belief that intelligence, it need not be innate and it can be developed. Similar to planting the seeds of new knowledge into a fertilized mind that is ready to learn. To give an analogy, sun, water and soil could be teacher, book and furniture that is needed for growth and blossoming. And therefore, learning happens when connections are made within and between systems. Right? Usually, it is within the systems that we think of. But when you do this between the systems, learning just multiplies. In a way, that's why we have this reflector neurons. Naturally, we look at the others, observe, find out what they go through. If it could be an emotional journey or it could be something that they do to accomplish something, and by observing and repeating that, we are able to learn and we are able to grow. And therefore, when we are happier having grown, we have better relationship. So you look at how this cause and effect plays a role. So when we have this understanding, when we have this reflected neurons observing and understanding the emotional journey of the other and learning as to how we can place our emotional journey, we become happier. When we are happy, we have better relationship. When we choose to give more time for other people and observe, we have better relationship. We also learn from the other. It does not matter if you are an introvert or an extrovert. Recognizing and action on our innate needs for making human connections pave a way to lead a life with greater happiness and fulfillment thereof. And therefore, this is one of the powerful habits of a systems thinker, as to understand the connections within the system, the connections that are important, the connections that have the cause and effect relationship, and also to learn the meaningful connections between two systems is indeed a powerful system thinker's habit. And every one of us can develop such a habit by merely practicing and practicing.